Hi guys, we're so glad that you're here to join us. We're going to wait for put people to trickle in, and then we'll get started. But you can see on the screen, obviously the homepage, and then Tracy's here, and we're so grateful to have her. So we'll give it a couple seconds of awkwardly staring at the screen, and then get moving into it. I think I had to edit this out of the last one because it was just me, and I forgot that when my face goes dead, I have no emotion left, and I look mean. So I have to be really cautious about that. But so we'll let it, we'll give it another minute or two and then get moving. If if you guys want, while you're coming in, if you have questions for Tracy, drop them into the Q&A, please, and we'll be able to answer some of those at the end of our Q&A. So. Okay, well, give me 1 second and we'll get started. So Tracy, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I know how grateful everybody is to hear your incredible expertise and learn more about what you know that we don't. So, we'll just kind of jump in and we'll get started talking about our markets and everything that's going on. So one of the big things that's in the news this week are the conventions, and we want to talk about that. It's become sort of a hot button issue to have a rally or to not have a rally. Seems like there's probably, if you're going to split it up, a group of people who are really comfortable having a rally, people who think they're totally irresponsible, and people somewhere in the middle. How do you look presidential and strong, like a leader, and still speak to those votes in the middle? Which side wins out, and how do you position yourself within this weird environment?
Thanks, Allison, and thanks for having me. I want to say hi to everybody who's here and be completely transparent that I am very new to your predictive markets, and I think it's super fascinating, but I can't claim the level of slick expertise that I know your members have. So thanks for having me, and thanks also for bearing with me. Um, so your question is about the convention as well as portraying leadership. Which would you like to talk about first? They're pretty different things in a lot of ways.
Well, why don't we talk about the conventions and how you think this plays out as we're
Sure.
moving forward. So we see on the screen that we have 59 cents voting yes that there will be a Democratic convention in Milwaukee. Um, what do you think the chances are of that happening, and how does that look for Democrats?
hmm I saw that really high value on Milwaukee, and I was so surprised. There's very few scenarios where I see the conventions happening as we know them, as we've experienced them. Of the three recent ones that I've attended, I can't imagine they're ever going to look that way again. So in as much as you take that into account, I find that higher than I would have placed it. What's important to note is that either party is really in a jam in terms of announcing what's going to happen. That certainly both parties are planning for all kinds of scenarios, from completely virtual to in person to hybrids. And so that planning is happening, but they can't telegraph any of that. That would be such a gift to our geopolitical opponents that it would be reckless and foolish to announce something too far in advance.
Mm.
So I think that's important to keep in mind with the predicting. But nonetheless, I would say Milwaukee just doesn't feel likely. In particular, there's some very kind of practical reasons why I think that's true, including such things as its proximity to Chicago and O'Hare Airport, and the likelihood that the pandemic will still be really ravaging that part of the country. And so flying people in, it's hard to imagine. And as for North Carolina and Trump, he certainly did a good job making a whole hullabaloo out of that in recent days. But I'd say three things about North Carolina. First is, we all know that the president wants a coronation. He's, in case this is a news flash to people, he is a TV guy, okay? I know that's new. So he wants that. He wants the show. That's very much in keeping with who he is and his styling as a politician. The second thing is, he likes to just, kick up dust and distract from other things. So I do think this notion of going to another state is meant as a distraction on his end. And the third thing I'll say is that when we talk about conventions, I know you know this, Allison, from your previous work, but there's really two things that happen at a convention. There's the part that you see on TV and maybe pay attention to for 20 minutes at 8 p.m. And then there's a whole other convention that is essentially schmoozing, networking, glad handing, business cards, exhausting, absolutely unhealthy in so many ways. So how does that convention, that's the convention. It's the business groups and the skyboxes and, the parties that never stop. And when you think about that piece of the convention and juxtapose it to the part of accepting the nomination and the pomp and circumstance that's so traditional, it's very hard for me to see. I guess I channel Dr. Fauci in this regard, who said the decision has to be a public health decision. It's not whether Trump wants the party or not. It's a public health decision because of what the convention is, what it's composed of, and what it's historically always been. And that's just a giant mess of people and parties. So how's that going to happen?
Well, and that's the same line that you see Governor Cooper taking, and also I think the mayor of Charlotte as well, taking that line of this is a public health decision. So I think that it sort of segues us a little bit into, how do you do rallies? How does the president, that is so much a part of his brand. And also Joe Biden's, it's when the president has such a strength in keeping media attention. How do you juggle that on Joe Biden's part and also the president's part? Can you lean into their strengths, or what does that look like?
Well, I think it's very notable that Biden emerged. It's almost comical if you think about it, that he's been, in his house for all these days and weeks, but he emerged on Memorial Day. He knew that was going to obviously be a moment of tremendous attention on him. And in addition to appropriately and solemnly marking Memorial Day, he was wearing a face covering. And so he managed to squish all kinds of political theatrics and tactics into his one outing on Monday. And I expect that that's what we'll see more of, that you have to really maximize any time that you're going to get in a traditional sense. And if you think about what else is happening while we're all coming to terms with what our work worlds and our professional worlds look like now, it's important to remember that the Trump campaign is also doing some really innovative campaign tactical work as well. I don't know if you've previously talked about the app, the Trump campaign app.
No.
So it's fascinating to me. They've, I think, I will say this as a Democrat, I think that they are kind of kicking our ass on this particular thing. They've set up the app in such a way that it's like gaming. If you download the app, you get, 10 points or 100 points or something like that. If you share the app with a friend, you get another 100 points. If you get 1,000 points, you get a free hat. They're doing that kind of hybrid of high technology, capitalizing on people's sort of download proclivities
Hmm.
and incentivizing it. I mean, we could do a whole conversation just about the campaign app, which
Oh, for sure.
we have nothing like that for Biden, for the Democrats. Although, maybe wait a week and we'll dig one up somehow. But I just think those are really interesting contrasts that fit very much with who both of those candidates are. For Biden, it was capitalizing on a very traditional appearance on a holiday. For Trump, it's innovating in the technology space and capitalizing on, frankly, people's obsession with, what is it, Animal Crossing and all these
Farmville,
games
those
and
kinds of things.
Farmville. Yeah, exactly.
Really.
Yeah, I don't know, but
well, there's deep
so
psychology behind those as well, which I think
absolutely.
is really fascinating. So.
Absolutely. And for all of the oxygen that gets sucked out just based on, what Trump may be tweeting or something like that, I think it's so critical to remember what infrastructure is chugging along for the campaigns.
Yeah, and Doug made that point last week as well, as you saw Trump last time around with more bare bones campaign. This time it's a very, very sophisticated political operation. So.
Absolutely, and flush. I mean, it's almost Bloombergian in that regard.
Well, so we'll shift gears a little bit to the Veep stakes. So Biden has a number of potential running mates circulating in the press. I would imagine that's not an accident that these names are out there. Most recently, I think it was Amy Klobuchar, who, if you look down at our markets, Kamala Harris is leading the pack, and then you have Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, and then Val Demings. Who do you think is his best pick, and who are some sort of wildcard picks?
I'm grateful for the question, and I'm also very intimidated by the question because, I don't know what. Am I going to be held to this? Am I going to be, persecuted if
Nobody
I'm
ever held
wrong?
anybody to anything in politics, right?
That is an excellent reminder. Thank you for that. I think that there's tremendous case to be made for several of these women, and I think it's not surprising to me that Senator Harris is atop your list. And my understanding from conversations with various people is that that's pretty accurate. It's also pretty fluid. It wasn't, but I would say maybe 10 days ago that Governor Whitmer was still very much a top choice. And that was before her husband's stupid thing with the boat and that whole story broke. That was before that. But, clearly she's not, she's neither showing up as a contender with your market, nor is she showing up as a contender among people involved in the discussions. So I think that this looks like an interesting opportunity to, not only fulfill his pledge to be attentive to gender, but to have a whole host of demographics also come into play. All that said, if you haven't watched Veep on HBO, you have no business saying that you're a political junkie. Okay, let's be clear about that. And if you've watched Veep on HBO, you know that this is not the job people really truly are clamoring for. It's it's so funny to me, the attention that goes into this for such little payoff in the end. And certainly we've seen that time and again, presidential cycles.
And with that payoff, how do you see this being a real, I mean, when it comes to the fact that Biden's made a pledge, and then if you look at African American women, for example, they're one of his most valuable demographics and voting bases. Do you see a bump? And is that important, or are the stakes really high, or are they kind of lowered? Does it matter ultimately for him?
It certainly will in the immediate term, and in that sort of near short term where bookers will have to fill airtime on cable, and so this will be
familiar with that.
I thought so. This will be what's hotly discussed, but it's so, it's a fascinating intellectual exercise to imagine what lies ahead between now and election day in terms of the pandemic and the effects on everyone's lives. So I'm grateful that you asked about, you know, different tactics and things like that. But you know, I have a pretty singular theory about the ultimate outcome of the presidential race, and you know, we can get into that now or later. But um, the Veep, you know, everybody's, I think, familiar with the term that it's just a bounce. It's a Veep bounce,
Hmm. Yeah.
and certainly we'll see that. And honestly, it's the least of our problems.
Hmm.
I'm going to leave it at that.
Well, I'd love to hear more. You say you have a singular sort of theory about the race. I'd love to hear more about that. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit.
Sure. I don't know that this, again, given that I'm a newbie in your predictive market space, I don't know how neatly my theory will fit into what you're analyzing and looking at, but
Yeah.
I truly believe that the Democrats' chance of winning is dependent on our ability to have a free and fair election, and that is truly what will be the decider. If we have the type of voter suppression and interference and God knows what other kinds of hijinks happening, and the election is compromised, Democrats are going to lose.
Hmm.
And how we ensure the safety and fairness and freedom of this election is very much in question right now. You know, even Trump's press secretary today was making her own series of bizarre claims about absentee voting, of which she apparently is quite a it's her favorite way to vote, but apparently it shouldn't be others' favorite ways to vote. So anyway, the point here is that we don't know,
Yeah.
but it's not something we can truly measure. But I do think it's something that we should be truly mindful of, and frankly scared of. That the best run, you know, no one will even remember the conventions by election day. It'll just be some blur that we'll call summer.
Yeah.
We don't know if we're going to get the V-shaped economic rebound. We don't know where we'll be. So how we can possibly be doing the kind of election monitoring that is essential is still very much being figured out. And I believe that is the deciding factor.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that have to pivot so quickly within this. I mean, we look back to Iowa, I mean, that had nothing, the Iowa caucuses, that had nothing to do with any of this. And we thought that was this big, you know, massive blunder. And and now it's something in the past. And but it also, you know, it brings up, you know, how quickly can we pivot to a you know, nationwide mail-in ballot system. So things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think we wanted to talk a little bit about Omar Khwaja talked about how, you know, within this like larger conversation, Trump has rallied his base, and this is one of our traders who asked this question, has rallied his base by blaming Democratic governors for the economic pain caused by the pandemic. So this is a larger strategic question. How does Biden manage that fine line, disassociating himself from, or do you disassociate yourself from Governor Whitmer or Governor Wolf, but also leverage that capital that those governors have in key states like Michigan and Pennsylvania? Where is that line? How does he weave that?
I suppose an important factor here is understanding the electorate's preferences
Mm,
for the actions of local and state leaders versus a higher disapproval for federal.
mm,
And and I think that's where the leverage point is. You know, I'm in Chicago right now. Our governor has been sparring with Trump, not as much in recent weeks, but
mm,
he was doing so very aggressively, and his numbers have been very steadily high. There's high approval for what he's doing, that I think isn't necessarily a partisan issue. That I think that it's the proximity that the voters have to their elected officials. And you're going to see your governor and know that what's happening is going to have a direct and immediate effect on your life. And so again, it's that leverage point for Biden to think about the lived what's happening in these states? What is it that those voters are looking to their local leaders for, and then capitalizing on that? I have to believe this is going to be, it's all going to be about the economic rebound.
Well, and for
so different states will be in different places based on their industries.
Yeah, well, and to that point, for our traders, keying in on very specific states and understanding those, local politics and kind of nerding out on it, I guess, is really important. So, so we wanted to talk a little bit about this sort of larger balance of power and how you see it possibly playing out. North Carolina has been trending toward a battleground state for a while. Virginia has all but turned blue in a lot of ways. Arizona is more blue. And then you look at a place like Montana, where Steve Daines is in a really tight race. What's going on with the balance of power in the United States? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because it seems like there's an enormous amount of change. We talk about being so divided, but there's an enormous amount of change. And do you have any sort of overarching ideas or theories on that?
I'm going to take a sip of wine first, and then I'll answer, because it warrants it. Your question warrants it. So cheers.
Cheers, everyone.
The states that you highlighted are certainly fascinating examples. And if you go a little bit deeper, I still, however many months later, I'm still floored by what happened in Virginia in terms of gun sense candidates cleaning up. It was a victory for that movement, for the gun sense movement. It was a victory on campaign tactics, that the state was absolutely flooded with material and activism. And so I think, the trends in each of these states have very interesting sort of secondary drivers behind them, which is always a danger when you try to, have some sort of flat theory that applies to all of them. But okay, so Montana, is so interesting to me. And in particular, going back to my point about the electorate being just more accepting and happy with local leaders, Governor Bullock's, the tag, I don't think it's his official slogan, but the tag that he's been using is, it just sums it up so well. And it says, "Make Washington work like Montana." That's his line. And Bullock is, of course, current governor, two-term governor, former attorney general. Now he's going for the Senate seat after dropping out of the presidential race. And despite that whole portfolio and his clear ambitions for the White House, however fleeting, he's still, and his team is still making that sort of rhetorical switch, that make Washington work like Montana. And that, to me, says a whole lot about what that race is. I think Bullock is seems like such an entrenched figure in Montana politics, and his ratings seem to be quite static in a good way. And it's not surprising to me that race is close. I don't think that means all of a sudden we're going to be like, oh, Montana is just dark blue. I mean, of course that's not, that implies so many more bigger demographic and type shifts. But I do think it speaks to the principle about the proximity that voters can have to their elected officials.
Well, in a state like Montana, there's 1 million people in a massive state. So all of these, you get a lot more touch from each candidate. And if you are a nerd like me and have gone through the voter rolls of each county in Montana, I highly encourage anybody who's kind of fascinated by this state and the Senate race to do so. You see that people more often than not, and especially in sort of more swing counties, vote for people rather than a straight ticket. So, and I think that local side really brings that out. To that point as well, that is sort of the secondary driver. So if the gun issue was a sort of secondary driver within Virginia, that locality and that interest in like local politics is a secondary driver in a state like Montana. So,
Mhm, mhm.
um,
Of course, all of those examples are
yeah,
pre-pandemic, and
we don't know what's happening.
I, no, I mean, how can we?
Yeah,
How can we possibly begin to forecast? I've worked with groups that are modeling all of these things, just not even campaigns, but just advocacy and general practices, and everybody is leaning into the shit utterly hitting the fan scenario, and even that doesn't answer a lot of these questions. So it's unlike anything, and it's fascinating and terrifying, and depending on my mood, it's or one or the other. But there's something so incomprehensibly unknown about this election
yeah.
that makes me all the more intrigued with how your traders are making their decisions.
Yeah, I mean, we really enjoy, I've really enjoyed watching the trends, like the larger trends, and seeing where they go. I think that that's been a fascinating experience for me as a political
Mm-hmm.
watcher. So we've got questions from the audience.
Oh, good.
So we do have somebody trying to pin you down a little bit on the VP. If you were going to put your money somewhere, who would you put it on?
Probably Senator Harris.
Okay. So that seems like so that's Bradley Bachuk. You guys are gonna have to forgive me.
Oh,
I
hi,
always was,
Bradley.
I was always wondering, how it must feel for anchors to try to pronounce names, and now I know. So, the next one we have up is: do you see Biden making any of the same mistakes that Hillary did? So, whatever those mistakes you might think, pitfalls that she faced, do you see that, and how does he avoid that?
Oh, for sure he is.
Yeah.
It's also probably impossible to avoid, and
Yeah.
that's just because he's a grown man in his 70s. He's not going to all of a sudden adopt a new persona and a new sort of vibe. And I mean, he's going to be the same person. And I think that that was very true for Hillary as well. You can't change who you are as a candidate. And for two people in this case, a man and a woman, to have been decades upon decades in the public eye, you don't get to change.
Yeah.
It seems sort of counterintuitive.
Yeah, sort of the past behavior is the most indicative of future behavior kind of belief.
It
So,
would seem to be.
um,
And the irony there is that, the world, of course, is changing, and we're dealing with an incumbent president who is nothing like anything or anyone. And so what a matchup. It's astonishing.
yeah, it's certainly, I mean, you couldn't throw more curveballs into this. Well, let's hope you can't throw more curveballs into this election.
Oh
I
God.
almost feel like we're in a moment when you say things like that and you think, oh wow, like then murder hornets. But um, so, what do you see the chances of the Senate flipping when you look at that? Our just for your knowledge, our traders, I believe, if we can pull up that market, have leaned into the Senate being democratically controlled. So
I've had different thoughts about this, kind of month by month. And again, pre-pandemic, I'm not sure I would have been bullish on on Democrats getting the Senate, but I can see the logic in arguing that Democrats could.
mm,
And I do think that this will come back to how how we're rebounding, how that economic rebound is happening, and how Democrats right now in the Senate are hell-bent on illustrating the lack of activity by Republicans when it comes to the pandemic and sort of aid and assistance. And they're crushing on McConnell for focusing too much on judicial nominations and not on, another stimulus or what have you. They're making that contrast. And that's a pretty powerful contrast. And I do think that that tips in the favor of Democrats, that, hey, we're trying to help. We're trying to get you what you need to recover from the unimaginable. And what's Mitch McConnell and crew doing?
Mm.
how is that helping you? And I think that that's a very potent line for Democrats to continue to hold.
Yeah. So this, I think we talked a little bit about this before we went live. Emily Kasinger says, with access to public space limited due to COVID, how can Democrats use online space to boost engagement? So I think we've seen a couple town halls you were mentioning here and there, but I think Tim Kaine did one I saw recently. How can that tool be utilized?
I think what I would say is, at what point are we utilizing it too much?
Mm.
Because the inclination among practitioners in the campaign space is to just experiment to the nth with digital offerings. And whether it's, just about an hour before we went live, Biden released a video, I think a very well done, powerful video talking about the United States losing 100,000 people. You don't see Trump doing something like that, but you do see him, you do see his campaign doing things like the app that I mentioned earlier. And so they're experimenting and innovating too. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's innovative that Biden made a video, obviously, but there's something very valuable about the ease of digital organizing, especially in the virtual event space, that things can be pre-recorded too. So if you can't, if Biden needs to be 3 places at once, he actually can be 3 places at once, and there could be 3 separate digital community events happening, and they're able to, literally zoom him into each one.
Yeah.
So that's, to me, that's an opportunity that we're not tethered in time and space. I certainly mourn the loss of the public component and the gathering and the physical nature of rallying for a candidate. But we're all going to be, our eyesight's all going to be failing because we're all going to be staring at our screens nonstop.
Yeah.
You get those notices on your phone, has your screen time gone up or down? I don't know one person whose screen time is going down. So
well,
that's just it. That's
yeah.
our new thing. That's just where we're going to stay.
Well, and it's interesting too, because if anybody who's been in those, charisma is such a powerful force in politics. And so anybody who's been to those rallies knows what that effect can have on people who maybe were on the fence, and you go to that and you're overwhelmed with it. Or even, we've been all around different types of politicians. To see somebody you see on TV and you're thinking, I don't get it. And then to see them in person as a retail politician and think, wow, there's really something there. It's changing the dynamics of how you energetically or, boost people's energy for politics. So
I think the value of a handshake is something, a lot of people are talking about, the death now of the handshake. But certainly there are voters out there whose opinions have changed just by the opportunity to shake hands with the candidate.
Yeah. Well, Tracy, I think we've, exhausted our time with you, and we're so grateful for you taking the time to answer our questions. And we'll go ahead and post this. And if you guys have any additional questions, please shoot us an email at press@predictit.org. And I hope you have some fun poking around the website and learning more about this. Our traders do, I think, a really interesting job of predicting trends ahead of time, which I've loved watching. So anyway.
It's fascinating. Thank you for having me, and thank you for bearing with me as a newbie.
No, we need your expertise. So
I'm grateful, and I hope everyone is well, and we'll see you around.
Great. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.